The door to my private office is heavy, solid oak, designed to keep the world out. But today, it was the gateway to a moment I had spent 5 years inadvertently preparing for. My assistant, Marin, buzzed me to let me know the final candidate had arrived. I didn't look at the security monitor. I didn't need to. I already knew the sound of those heels clicking against the marble floor. It was a confident, rhythmic sound, the sound of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. When the door opened, the scent of expensive perfume hit the room before she did. Harper stepped in, wearing a navy blazer that cost more than my first car and a smile that was perfectly calibrated for a magazine cover. It was her success smile, radiant, practiced, and utterly hollow. She didn't even look at me at first. She was too busy taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cumberland River, the modern art on the walls, and the heavy atmosphere of a firm that handled 10-figure deals. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Collier," she said, her voice dripping with that polished private school charm. "I've heard so much about Vantage Partners." I kept my back to her, staring out at the gray waters of the river below. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. In the world of high-stakes finance, silence is a weapon. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. Then, I slowly turned my chair around. The transformation was violent. It wasn't just that her smile faded, it was like the electricity had been cut to a whole city block. Her jaw didn't just drop, it went slack. Her eyes darted from my face to the solid gold nameplate on my desk. Clara Collier, founder. The leather portfolio in her hand slipped an inch. The success smile didn't just disappear, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She looked at me, then at the nameplate, then back at me, and for the first time in 24 years, my sister was speechless. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand why my sister was currently gasping for air in my office, we have to go back to 3 weeks ago. Back to a dining room in Nashville that smelled of roasted turkey, expensive wine, and the suffocating weight of family expectations. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, I want to know who is sitting here with me right now. This story is traveling fast, and I want to see where it lands. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I love seeing the community we are building here. The Thanksgiving table was a stage, and my mother, Evelyn, was the director. She sat at the head, wine glass in hand, her eyes shining with the kind of pride she only reserved for one person. "Everyone, a toast," Evelyn announced, tapping her crystal glass. My uncles and cousins went quiet. My father, Arthur, gave a small, tired nod from the other end of the table. "To Harper. She just finished her MBA with honors, and the recruiters are practically breaking down her door. She is the crown jewel of this family, and I couldn't be prouder of the woman she's become." A chorus of "hear, hear" went around the table. Harper beamed, leaning into the praise like a flower to the sun. And then there was me. I was sitting in my usual spot, the middle child chair, tucked between an uncle who only talked about his lawn and a cousin who didn't remember my name. I was wearing a plain gray sweater and jeans. I hadn't said a word about my life in 3 years. My mother's eyes finally drifted toward me, but the warmth vanished, replaced by a look of mild pity. "And to Clara," she added, almost as an afterthought, "who is still doing her little freelance computer things. It's good to have a hobby, dear, but maybe this year you can ask Harper for some career advice. She has real connections now." Harper looked at me across the table, that polite, pitying smile firmly in place. "Seriously, Clara," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I know a few people looking for junior admins. It's mostly data entry, but it's steady. It's better than sitting in your apartment all day looking at spreadsheets." The table erupted in light laughter. My father kept cutting his turkey, looking at his plate. He didn't look up. He never did. I took a slow sip of my water. My heart didn't race. I didn't get angry. I just felt a cold, sharp clarity. They saw a quiet girl in a gray sweater. They didn't see the CEO who had just authorized a $40 million acquisition 3 hours before driving over here. They didn't see the woman who had built a financial empire while they were busy polishing Harper's ego. I looked at my mother, then at Harper, and I realized something. I hadn't been hiding my success from them out of spite. I had been hiding it out of survival. Because if I had told them the truth, they would have tried to claim it, or they would have tried to break it. "Thanks, Harper," I said quietly, setting my glass down. "I'll keep that in mind." "Good," she said, turning back to the ants to describe her vision for her career. I left the dinner early that night. As I walked to my SUV in the driveway, the Nashville air was crisp. I looked back at the warm glow of the windows, at the family inside who thought they knew exactly who I was. I didn't know then that in less than a month, Harper would be sitting in my lobby, begging for a seat at my table. I didn't know that the connections she bragged about were about to lead her straight into the one room she wasn't prepared to own. But as I started my engine, I knew one thing for sure. The silence was over, and the reveal was going to be louder than any of them could imagine. People often ask me why I didn't just shout my success from the rooftops the moment I made my first million. They don't understand that when you grow up invisible, silence isn't just a choice. It is a suit of armor. Growing up in the shadow of Harper wasn't just about being second best. It was about being a ghost. My mother, Evelyn, didn't just love Harper. She curated her. Every pageant, every tennis lesson, every networking brunch was a calculated investment in the Harper brand. I remember my 10th birthday. I had spent months obsessed with patterns and logic puzzles. I had actually qualified for a regional mathematics competition, the only kid from my school to do so. I remember standing at the front door, clutching my little registration card, waiting for my parents to take me to the hall. But that was the same afternoon Harper had her lead solo in the community play. My mother didn't even look at my card. She just handed me a frozen pizza and told me my father would be home late and she couldn't miss Harper's big moment. I spent my 10th birthday sitting on the floor of our kitchen, solving complex equations by the light of the oven clock, while my family cheered for a girl pretending to be someone else on a stage. That was the day I realized that if I wanted a seat at the table, I would have to build the table myself. My father, Arthur, was the quiet observer. He saw everything but said nothing. He ran a plumbing supply business, a man of hard work and few words. I think he saw himself in me, but he was too afraid of my mother's loud, demanding personality to ever bridge the gap. He chose the path of least resistance, which meant letting me drift further and further away into the background. By the time I hit my early 20s, I had mastered the art of being underestimated. While Harper was using our family's small savings to fund her lifestyle at a top-tier university, I was working 2 jobs and studying financial markets until my eyes bled. I didn't want a degree for the wall. I wanted the knowledge that makes people powerful. I remember the night I decided to start my own firm. It was 2 a.m., and I was sitting in a studio apartment that smelled like damp carpet and cheap coffee. I was looking at a spreadsheet of a failing manufacturing company. On paper, they were bankrupt. But in the data, I saw a heartbeat. I saw a way to restructure their debt that no one else had noticed. I cold called the CEO for 3 weeks straight. On the 21st day, he finally took the call just to tell me to stop calling him. I told him, "Give me 10 minutes. If I don't save you $5 million in those 10 minutes, I'll never call you again." He gave me 8. I saved him 7 million. That was the birth of Vantage Partners. But at home, the narrative never changed. To Evelyn and Harper, I was still the unambitious one. I tried, just once, to share my fire. I remember a Sunday dinner when I was 25. I had just landed my 3rd major client. I was so proud, I thought my heart would burst. I waited for a gap in the conversation about Harper's sorority elections and said, "I'm actually starting my own advisory firm. I signed my first corporate contract this morning." The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was mocking. My mother didn't even stop chewing her salad. "That's sweet, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with condensation. "But business is for people with the right personality. You're too quiet. You don't have the sparkle Harper has. Don't waste your little savings on a fantasy. Why don't you focus on finding a nice, stable job at a bank? A teller position, maybe? Harper giggled, swirling her wine. Mom's right. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. I can talk to one of my professors for you. He has a brother who owns a car wash. They might need someone to handle the books. I looked at my father. He looked down at his steak, his fork scraping against the porcelain. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look me in the eye. That was the night the paper house theory was born in my mind. Sharing my dreams with them was like handing a lit match to someone standing in a paper house. They wouldn't just burn the dream, they would burn the person who had it. So I went dark. I moved to a tiny office above a 24-hour laundromat. The noise of the dryers was my soundtrack. For 2 years, I worked 16-hour days. I learned the language of mergers, the psychology of debt, and the ruthlessness of acquisitions. I was a ghost in the city, building an empire from a desk I had bought for $20 at a yard sale. And then, everything changed when a man named Mr. Sterling walked into my life. Sterling was a legend. Former Wall Street, retired to Nashville, and bored out of his mind. He didn't care about my family name. He didn't care that I didn't have a sparkle. He sat across from my second-hand desk, looked at my analysis of a regional healthcare merger, and stayed silent for a full 5 minutes. I thought he was going to laugh. Instead, he closed the folder and looked at me with eyes that had seen everything. "Your numbers aren't just accurate, Clara," he said. "They're aggressive. You see the gaps where everyone else sees walls. I'm not going to be your client. I'm going to be your partner. We're going to turn this little office into a powerhouse." And we did. Over the next few years, Vantage Partners moved from the laundromat to a glass tower. We handled deals that made the local news, but I always kept my name out of the headlines. I used my professional name, Collier, and registered the firm under a holding company. I lived a double life. At the office, I was the woman who could make CEOs tremble with a single chart. At my parents' house, I was still the girl who brought the store-bought potato salad and sat by the fence, watching Harper perform. I watched them celebrate Harper's achievements while my own bank account grew into the millions. I watched my mother brag about Harper's internship at a firm I could have bought with a week's profit. The question I want to ask you all is this: if you had a secret this big, could you keep it? Could you sit there and let people you love call you a failure while you were secretly winning? Tell me in the comments. Is it strength, or is it just a different kind of pain? Because the day of that cookout, when Harper announced she was coming to my firm, the two halves of my life didn't just collide, they exploded. I didn't invite her. I didn't plan it. But as I sat there by the fence, listening to her talk about how she was going to own the interview at Vantage Partners, I realized that the universe had just handed me a mirror, and I was going to make sure Harper finally had to look at herself in it. I'm curious, have you ever worked for something in total silence? No posts on social media, no bragging to friends, just pure, quiet grind? Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever been the silent builder. We need to know we're not alone. Because next, I'm going to take you inside that interview room, and you're going to see exactly what happens when a lifetime of unearned confidence meets 10 years of invisible hard work. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits. That was the air at the Thanksgiving dinner after Harper made her big announcement. She didn't just say she had an interview, she spoke as if she had already been crowned queen of the industry. "Vantage Partners," she repeated, savoring the name like an expensive wine. "The recruiter told me they've been tracking my profile for months. They only hire from the top 1%. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I'll take it if the sign-on bonus isn't right." My mother, Evelyn, was practically vibrating with excitement. She leaned across the table, her eyes darting to me for just a second, not to share the joy, but to ensure I was feeling the sting. "Did you hear that, Clara? The top 1%. That's the world Harper belongs in, real business, real stakes." I looked down at my plate. I was thinking about the email I had sent to my head of recruitment, Marin, 3 months ago. I had told her to cast a wide net for our new associate program. I wanted fresh perspectives, not just Ivy League clones. I never expected Harper's name to pop up in the algorithm. But when it did, I didn't stop it. Why? Because for 24 years I had been told that Harper was a natural leader and I was just good with chores. I wanted to see how a natural leader handled a room where no one knew her mother's maiden name. "You should really try to fix your hair tomorrow, Clara," Harper said, her voice dropping into that fake sweet register. "If I get the job, I might be able to slide you a resume for the reception desk. You're always so quiet, you'd be perfect for a job where you just have to sit there and look busy." I didn't snap. I didn't reveal my hand. I just smiled, a real, genuine smile that they completely misinterpreted as submission. "Good luck tomorrow, Harper," I said. "I have a feeling it's going to be a day you'll never forget." I left the house shortly after. I didn't go home to sleep. I went to the office. There is something about a skyscraper at 11 p.m. that centers me. The janitors were the only ones there. They knew me as Miss Collier, the woman who worked harder than anyone else in the building. I sat in my chair, the one Harper would be sitting across from in less than 12 hours, and I opened her digital file. It was a masterpiece of fluff. Her resume was beautiful, expensive, heavyweight paper, gold leaf accents on the digital header, and words like synergistic leadership and strategic orchestration. But when I looked at the actual data, there was nothing. Every internship was at a company owned by a family friend. Every award was for social contributions, not financial performance. She was a house made of glass, built on a foundation of sand. And tomorrow, the tide was coming in. I want to pause here and ask you something. If you were in my shoes, would you have warned her? Would you have told her, "Hey, that's my company, don't embarrass yourself"? Or would you let her walk into the fire she built for herself? Type "warn" or "fire" in the comments. I'm curious to see where your moral compass points. The next morning, the sun hit the Nashville skyline like a spotlight. I was in my suit by 6 a.m. This wasn't the gray sweater from the night before. This was a charcoal gray power suit, tailored to the millimeter, paired with heels that felt like armor. I met with my interview panel at 8:30 a.m. There were 3 of them. Marcus, our head of strategy, who had a nose for bullshit like a bloodhound; Sarah, our compliance lead, who was as cold as a winter morning; and David, the operations director, who had grown up in the same kind of nothing background I had. "We have a big candidate at 9, Marcus said, flipping through Harper's resume. "Credentials look shiny, maybe a bit too shiny." "Treat her like anyone else," I said, my voice steady. "No shortcuts, no softballs. If she's as good as this paper says she is, she'll survive. If not, well, we don't hire potential at Vantage. We hire results." I didn't tell them she was my sister. I wanted the most honest assessment possible. At 8:55 a.m., I stood by the one-way glass in the observation room. I watched the elevator doors open. Harper stepped out. She looked incredible. She had that Nashville socialite glow, her hair perfectly coiffed, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She walked to the reception desk with a swagger that said she already owned the place. She flirted slightly with the security guard, gave the receptionist a look that was both charming and dismissive, and took a seat. She adjusted her guest badge as if it were a medal of honor. She looked around the lobby, probably imagining where she would put her desk. She had no idea that I was standing 10 feet away, watching her every move, hearing her hum a little tune to herself. She thought she was walking into her dream job. She didn't realize she was walking into a mirror. And as the clock struck 9 and Marcus walked out to greet her, I felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of me, the little girl who solved math problems by the oven light, wanted to run out and save her. But the woman I had become, the woman who had bled and sweated to build this empire, knew better. Some lessons can't be taught at a dinner table. They have to be earned in the arena. The first interview was about to begin, and Harper was about to find out that in the real world, sparkle doesn't count for much when the numbers don't add up. Stay with me, because in the next part, the mask doesn't just slip, it gets ripped off. And you won't believe the first thing Harper said when she realized who was really in charge. If you're still here, drop a "ready" in the comments. It's about to get very real. The interview room was a minimalist chamber of glass and steel. No distractions, just a table, 2 chairs, and the cold reality of the financial world. I stood in the observation room behind the one-way mirror, my coffee forgotten on the ledge. I could see Harper, but all she saw was her own reflection, perfectly polished and utterly confident. Marcus, my head of strategy, didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned forward and pushed a thin folder across the table. Harper, let's skip the pleasantries. Inside is a case study of a mid-sized tech firm facing a hostile takeover. You have 10 minutes to identify the structural weakness in their debt-to-equity ratio and propose a defense. I watched Harper's face. For a split second, that success smile flickered. She wasn't expecting a technical drill, she was expecting a conversation about her leadership philosophy. She opened the folder, and I saw her eyes darting across the pages. To a professional, those numbers told a story of a company bleeding out. To Harper, they might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics. She started talking, and she didn't stop for 12 minutes. She used every buzzword in the MBA handbook. She talked about synergistic pivots, stakeholder alignment, and brand equity. It was a brilliant performance of saying absolutely nothing. Marcus didn't interrupt, he just watched her with a deadpan expression. When she finally ran out of breath, he asked one question. That's a lot of theory, Harper, but the debt is due in 90 days. Which asset do you liquidate first to maintain cash flow? Harper blinked. She looked at the paper, then back at Marcus. Well, I think we need to conduct a cultural audit of the leadership team first to ensure the company doesn't have time for an audit. Marcus cut her off, his voice like a gavel. They have 90 days. The answer is on page 4. You missed it. I saw a bead of sweat break through Harper's perfect foundation. The sparkle was beginning to dim. The next hour was a slow-motion car crash. Sarah, our compliance lead, grilled her on regulatory hurdles. Harper tried to charm her, laughing off a question about international tax law as if it were a joke between friends. Sarah didn't laugh. She just wrote a single word on her notepad. Incompetent. Finally, it was David's turn. David, who had started as a night shift mechanic before putting himself through school, looked at Harper with a weary kind of curiosity. Tell me about a time you failed, he said. A real failure. One where people lost money or jobs because you made the wrong call, and tell me how you fixed it. Harper tilted her chin up, regaining some of her ego. Honestly, David, I've been very fortunate. I tend to surround myself with high achievers, so we usually mitigate failure before it happens. In grad school, I once got a B+ on a project because a teammate slipped up, but I managed to lead the group to. David closed the folder. The sound echoed in the quiet room. A B+ isn't a failure, Harper. It's a bad weekend. I'm asking about the scars. If you've never bled in this industry, you can't lead in it. Through the glass, I saw Harper's shoulders drop. The swagger was gone. She looked small in that big leather chair. She looked like the version of me she used to mock, uncertain and out of place. But unlike me, she didn't have the grit to fight back. I turned away from the mirror. A part of me felt a twinge of sadness. This was my sister, but a larger part of me felt a grim sense of justice. For years, my family had mistaken her loud confidence for competence and my quiet competence for weakness. Today, the world was finally correcting that error. I walked out of the observation room and headed toward my office at the end of the hall. It was time for the final act. Marin, I said as I passed my assistant's desk. Bring her in. She looks pretty shaken, Clara, Marin whispered. The panel gave her the lowest scores I've seen all year. I know, I said. Send her in anyway. I went into my office and stood by the window, my back to the door. I heard the heavy oak door creak open. I heard the hesitant click of her heels, no longer confident, but dragging. Miss Collier? She said. Her voice was thin, trembling. She sounded like a lost child. I'm here for the final interview. I didn't turn around yet. I let her stand there in the silence of my success. I let her look at the awards, the mahogany desk, the view of the city that she had told me I would never see. "You did poorly today, Harper," I said, my voice low and calm. "The questions were unfair," she blurted out, her old defensiveness flaring up for a second. "They were trying to trip me up. They didn't understand my vision. If you could just tell them who I am, I'm sure—" "I know exactly who you are," I said. Then I turned my chair. If I lived 1,000 years, I would never forget the look on her face. It was the sound of a glass building shattering in slow motion. Her skin went pale, almost gray. Her leather portfolio, the one she had used as a shield all morning, dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. "Clara," she whispered. Her eyes went to the nameplate. Clara Collier, then to me, then to the $30,000 watch on my wrist. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there as the last 5 years of her life were rewritten in an instant. The sister she had mocked, the hobbyist she had tried to get a job for at a car wash, was the person who owned the air she was breathing. "Welcome to Vantage Partners, Harper," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I believe you wanted to talk about your sign-on bonus. I want to ask you all something right now. If someone had treated you like a ghost for years and suddenly you held their entire future in your hand, what would you do? Would you give them the job to prove you're the bigger person, or would you show them the door to prove that actions have consequences? Drop a door or job in the comments. Let's see what kind of bosses you'd be." Because what Harper said next, it wasn't an apology. And it changed the way I looked at my family forever. Stay tuned for part 5, because the fallout is just beginning. The silence in the office was so thick you could hear the hum of the city through the double-paned glass. Harper stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The crown jewel of the family looked like she had just seen a ghost. "You?" she finally managed to choke out. This is a joke, right? Some kind of sick, elaborate prank you're playing because of what Mom said at dinner?" I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk that I had earned with 5 years of blood, sweat, and absolute isolation. "I don't have time for pranks, Harper," I said, my voice as cold and steady as a surgical blade. "And I don't run my company based on what Evelyn says at dinner. You are here because a recruiter's algorithm flagged your profile. You walked into this room on your own 2 feet, and you failed those interviews on your own too." Harper's shock was rapidly curdling into something uglier: anger. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. She stepped toward the desk, her hands trembling as she pointed a finger at me. "You set me up," she hissed. "You let me walk in here and humiliate myself in front of those people. You could have stopped this. You could have told me, but you sat there behind that glass and watched me struggle. What kind of sister does that, Clara? What kind of monster are you?" I let her words hang in the air. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. "I gave you a room, Harper. A fair room. No family names, no country club connections, no favors. I gave you the one thing you've always told everyone you wanted, a chance to prove you're the best. And what did you do with it? You talked about B-plus grades and buzzwords while my team asked for real-world solutions?" I stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the tiny cars below. "You want to talk about being a sister? For 5 years, I sat at those dinners. I listened to you and Mom mock my hobby. I listened to you offer me a job as a car wash bookkeeper while I was closing 8-figure deals. You never once asked me how I was doing. You never once looked past your own reflection to see if I was okay. You didn't want a sister, Harper. You wanted an audience." Harper's confidence finally broke. She sank into the leather chair, her leather portfolio discarded on the floor. The top 1% candidate was gone. In her place was a girl who finally realized that the world didn't owe her a living just because she was pretty and loud. "What am I supposed to tell Mom?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "She told everyone I was practically hired. She told the whole neighborhood." "Tell her the truth," I said. "Tell her that in the real world, sparkle doesn't pay the rent. and tell her that the daughter she spent years ignoring is the one who built the empire she's been trying to get you into? Harper didn't apologize. She didn't ask for a second chance. She just picked up her bag and walked out. She didn't slam the door. The quiet click of the latch was more final than any scream could have been. But the storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. 2 hours later, my personal phone exploded. It was Evelyn. I didn't even have to put the phone to my ear to hear her screaming. "Clara, how dare you? Harper just came home in tears. She told me everything. How could you be so cruel to your own blood? You have all this money, this power, and you use it to crush your sister's spirit? You should be ashamed of yourself." I sat back and closed my eyes. "Mom, did Harper tell you she failed the technical assessments? Did she tell you she couldn't answer a single basic question about the job?" "I don't care about the questions," Evelyn shrieked. "She's your sister. If you have a company, you give her a job. That's what families do. You have enough to share. You've been lying to us for years, letting us think you were struggling while you were living like a queen. You're selfish, Clara. You've always been selfish." There it was. The blood is thicker than water card. But here's the thing about that saying: people always use it when they want something from you, never when they are supposed to be giving something to you. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like ice, "I didn't lie to you. I just stopped offering you the truth because you didn't value it. You wanted Harper to be the star, so I let her be the star. But I built the theater. And in my theater, we hire based on merit, not on who your mother is. I love you, but you no longer have access to my life just because we share a last name." I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I blocked her. I want to ask you something right now, because this is a question that tears families apart. Is it ever okay to cut off your own parents or siblings when they become toxic to your success? Or are you obligated to carry them, even when they're the ones who tried to pull you down? Type freedom if you believe in setting boundaries, or family if you think blood comes first no matter what. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I would be spending my nights in total isolation. But then, on Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the security camera. It wasn't Evelyn. It wasn't Harper. It was my father, Arthur. He was standing there in his old work boots, looking up at my high-rise apartment like it was a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. My heart hammered in my chest. I almost didn't open the door. But I did. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked to the center of my living room and looked at the view. He looked at the awards on my shelf. He looked at the woman I had become. Then he turned to me, his eyes wet with a regret so deep it felt like it had been there for decades. He didn't offer a defense for my mother. He didn't ask for a job for Harper. He just said 4 words that broke me more than all of Evelyn's screaming ever could. I should have asked, "Stay with me for the final part." Because what happened next wasn't just about business. It was about whether or not a broken bond can ever truly be mended. And I have one final secret to share with you that changed the future of Vantage Partners forever. If you're still with me, drop a "stay" in the comments. The conclusion is where everything comes full circle. When my father said those 4 words, "I should have asked," the air seemed to leave the room. It wasn't an apology for a single mistake. It was an admission of a lifetime of looking the other way. I didn't invite him to sit down right away. I couldn't. I just stood by the kitchen island, clutching a glass of water, watching this man who had been a titan in my childhood look so small against the backdrop of my success. "I saw the office, Clara," Arthur said, his voice gravelly. "I drove by Vantage Partners this morning. I didn't go in. I just sat in the parking lot and looked up at the 14th floor. I remember when you were 12 and you told me you wanted to run the world. I thought it was just a kid dreaming. I didn't realize you were actually doing it." He finally looked at me, and I saw the tears he was trying to hide. "Your mother, she's angry because her pride is hurt, but I'm not angry, Clara. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that I let my daughter build a kingdom in the dark because she didn't feel safe enough to build it in the light of her own home." I felt the ice around my heart start to crack, just a little. "Why now, Dad? Why didn't you say something at all those dinners when Harper was making fun of me? He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Because I was a coward. I chose peace over justice. I let your mother lead because it was easier than standing up for the truth. But seeing Harper come home and realize she spent her life chasing shadows while you were building mountains, it woke me up. You don't owe us anything, Clara. Not a job, not a dollar, not even this conversation. For the first time in my adult life, my father didn't see me as a middle child or a hobbyist. He saw me as a peer. I want to ask you something, and be honest. If your father showed up after years of silence, not asking for money, but just admitting he was wrong, would you let him in? Or is it too little, too late? Type forgive or too late in the comments. This is a tough one, and I want to see how you feel. I didn't give him a job, and I didn't give him a check. Instead, I made him a cup of coffee. We sat on my balcony for 3 hours. I told him about the night I almost quit. I told him about Mr. Sterling and the laundromat office. I told him about the cold calls and the rejections. And for the first time, he listened, not as a parent judging a child, but as a man admiring a founder. The rest of the family? Well, the fallout was exactly what you'd expect. Evelyn still hasn't called. Word got back to me that she's telling the neighbors I stole the company from a silent partner and that Harper is taking a sabbatical to find a firm that appreciates her unique vision. Some people will never change because the truth is too heavy for them to carry. As for Harper, she moved to Atlanta a few months later. She didn't get a job in finance. Last I heard, she's working in high-end real estate. I think she finally realized that in my world, you can't fake the numbers. I hope she finds her own way, but it won't be on my dime or through my door. But here's the final secret I promised you. 3 months after that interview, I made a major change at Vantage Partners. I started the Invisible Talent Initiative. It's a scholarship and mentorship program specifically for people who don't have the sparkle, people who don't have the country club connections, people who are building their dreams in the dark. Every time I walk into that 14th floor boardroom and see a quiet, determined young woman or man sitting there with sharp numbers and a steady hand, I see myself. And I make sure they know that in this room, they are seen. Vantage Partners isn't just a firm anymore, it's a message. It's proof that the quiet ones, the ghosts, the line items people skip over, we are the ones who actually build the world. My name is Clara Collier. I grew up in Nashville as an afterthought, and I became the founder of an empire. If you are out there right now, working a job no one appreciates, building a dream no one believes in, or sitting at a dinner table where you feel like a ghost, listen to me. Keep going. Stay quiet. Build your kingdom in the silence, because one day the door will open, the chair will turn, and the world will finally have to look you in the eye. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you the strength to keep grinding, hit that subscribe button. This is a community for the builders, the grinders, and the ones who know that true power doesn't need to shout. Drop a kingdom in the comments if you're building yours right now. I'll be in there reading and cheering you on. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next story.